So last time up on Cinematic
I'm sorry,
Perspective.
I had a coffee mug going. Would you do
What
that again?
the hell?
I know. I'm sorry.
God.
Let's do it. Let's start again.
I just can't. So, last time up on Cinematic Perspective, we talked about Star Wars and the spectacular effect of Star Wars, the effect it had on us, the effect it had on the world, really. So this time we thought we'd dive into after Star Wars.
What?
What is that? What is after Star Wars?
But there is nothing after Star Wars.
There was something happening after the Star Wars? What?
There was lots of, oh no, there was life after Star Wars? Oh no. So
Unfortunately, Wyatt just lost the question because he didn't know what Empire Strikes Back was. Mother. Yes.
Okay, so
I'm like a little like Darth Vader figure with my coco. No, wow. You know what? Billy Crystal's going to sue us. It's going to be
that's true. He is. Billy Crystal, if you're out there, please come on the show. After Star Wars, I mean, Star Wars was just this massive crater, this massive impact that sent out these shockwaves. And it took a couple of months for everybody to sort of recover, and it took a couple of months for the studios to recover, and that's 1977. And then this interesting thing happened where, there was this sort of aftermath, and then we talked a little about the Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which could have been the sequel, but then they decided, no, we're gonna move on and do a whole trilogy. So they put Splinter of the Mind's Eye aside, and then they finally said to the world, Empire Strikes Back. In 1980, we're going to give you Empire Strikes Back. In the meantime, the rest of the world started going,
Star Wars Holiday Special.
Well, the holiday special. Oh dear God.
They needed to feed the machine.
Well, the holiday, but even that took a year and a half. That wasn't until the fall of '78, right? Well, the fall of '78 was kind of when everything started to cycle back around, because after Star Wars, everybody said, "Oh my God, science fiction." And it's interesting because, Hollywood, you and I have discussed this, Hollywood has a habit of going, oh, this thing is successful. Now, what can we do? How many cabooses can we hook to the successful thing? And that sometimes leads to waves of things, which you pointed out. That's why we have so many superhero films right now, because superhero films are successful.
Absolutely.
So Star Wars hit, and then everybody went, oh my God, what do we have? Do we have properties? Do we have science fiction? Do we have novels? What can we do? So every studio just started rushing around trying to come up with science fiction.
Let's go back a step, because I think there's some really interesting things. On the surface, you see a really popular genre of cinema hit, and everyone's kind of primed. They've had this incredible experience, and they want more. I think from a business point of view, from a Hollywood cinematic point of view, something really interesting happens as well. And we touched on it last time, but I do want to bring it up because I think it's really important, which is the birth of the tentpole movie experience. The idea of a movie that is going to bring people in, and they're going to be so hyped that they're going to turn around and want that other experience. And that's where, if you look at it, especially Star Wars comes out, no one's seen anything like this before. I don't remember people lining up on the street, around the block waiting for screening time to come on until Star Wars hits. And there are so many photos of people standing, literally down the street. Never happened before.
Maybe I would argue, and this is the only situation I would argue, from what I understand, when adjusted for inflation, I think that Gone with the Wind might still be the most successful film in history. And I have heard that the clamor for Gone with the Wind was unbelievable. And I mean, like, nowadays, if 100 million people in the United States see a film, that's remarkable. Back then, like, literally everyone of theater-going age saw Gone with the Wind. I mean, Gone with the Wind was probably the only other thing that approached Star Wars levels. But we're talking about Gone with the Wind, and then, 40 years later, Star Wars. So, I mean, there's really nothing else to compare to.
I'm just riffing off the top of my head. I don't know this, but would the Ten Commandments come close to that as well? Because I know that was a film that everyone right around the world kind of saw, and then they kept bringing it back. That was an interesting one due to Easter and the religious motif in the film.
It definitely became something that the hype and the popularity definitely extended, but I don't think it even approached. I mean, it was a very successful film, but I don't think it even approached the levels of success that either Gone with the Wind or Star Wars had.
Now, you were talking about Gone with the Wind. Was it the kind of, I don't know if fury is the right word, but where, like Gil was saying, you know, you had people lined up outside the theater waiting. Was it that kind of an experience, do you know? Or...
I think for Gone with the Wind it was. I literally don't think there was any other film prior to Star Wars other than Gone with the Wind where that kind of thing happened.
Okay. I'm sure they weren't camping out for 3 days.
No, they weren't. That they weren't doing.
You know what? That was a litmus test. I was waiting to ask. It's like, if they did a sequel to Gone with the Wind today, would people be camping outside 3 days before to go and see it?
That's a good question.
Where, like, you know, it's a generational thing. Like, I remember arriving in LA, and, you know, Phantom Menace is about to open, and I'm like trying to work out how to find a place to live so I can go to UCLA and do all that sort of stuff. And I'm like walking past, and I'm just having conversations with strangers, and they're like, "We've been here for like 30 days." And I'm like, seriously? And they're like, yeah, we went, like, there were teenagers, there were like young 20-year-olds who were it was a party for a month. And I remember, because I was at a hostel on Hollywood Boulevard, you know, if I had downtime, I'd just go and sit and talk shop, like I'm doing with you guys, right? And then they were like, are you going to join us? And I'm like, no, I'm not going to be there for the first one. And they're like, look, you know what? He's like, you can just sneak into the line here because you know. And I'm like, nah, it's cool. The complete irony with the whole thing was the last 24 hours, everyone stayed up and partied. One guy that I know fell asleep 20 minutes in and woke up at the credits. And I said, what do you do? And literally, this is his answer. He goes, I went outside, bought another ticket, and went to the next screening. So, like, you didn't have to wait. There wasn't this huge clamor. There was enough screens. There was enough, but they were trying to relive that kind of excitement that people heard.
Yes.
Star Wars is here, but you can only see it there, so you have to wait, and you have to, you know. And I mean, it's a thing of mythology. I love the sequence in the little scene in The Simpsons where, you know, Homer is talking about how he met Marge, and they're walking out of Empire Strikes Back. And Homer, being Homer, goes, who would have believed Darth Vader was Luke Skywalker's father? And there's a line of people going, oh, it's like trying to get in there. Like, thanks for ruining the movie, pal. You know, it was still one of these kind of things where if I'm going to go and see it, I'm happy to line up. I'm happy to go and be a part. That was part of the experience.
Well, episode 7, is that Force Awakens that we took Gabe to?
No, well, I'm sorry. Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
Right.
I lose track of which one is which.
It's understandable.
So when episode 7 came out, then we had a young friend who we took with us because he had only ever seen Star Wars films at home. He had never been to the theater to see them. And so here we are all excited about, we're going to go get food early, we're going to stand in line and have him have that experience. And so
because none of his friends, his teenaged age,
right,
wanted to do that.
Nobody wanted to go, yeah.
What is wrong with you kids these days? What is wrong with you?
Well, the disappointing thing was that opening night, that particular theater had Star Wars on 4 or 5 screens, so there was no line. We didn't have to wait outside, and I was like, well, that was a little disappointing, but yeah, I mean, he still loved the movie and loved being there with us and all.
Okay, so with the Force Awakens, I have to admit that after the prequels, which we could do a whole episode about,
and we will,
the prequels. After The Force Awakens, after they started showing the trailers, I was hesitant. I was really hesitant. I didn't know how I felt about it all. And
about the final 3?
Yeah, like, am I going to go back? Am I going to see? I mean, he fooled me. I was feeling like an abused child. I was like, you know, I've trusted you for so long and you've failed me, and I don't know that I want to go back.
Are you saying that George Lucas was your Jedi Master? You were his Padawan, you were ready to kill him like every other Padawan in the story does?
No. He was like an abusive stepfather who didn't like me. I mean, no, seriously, I just wasn't sure I wanted to put the time and energy into the new Star Wars films. And then I saw a couple of trailers. I was really happy with what I was seeing, and I decided not to take it so seriously. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go back in and I'm going to keep an open mind. And there are people who just are so passionately hateful about anything new in Disney they hate. I really enjoyed the new Star Wars films and took it all with a grain of salt. And are they flawless? No. But, I'm sorry, even the original trilogy has its issues. So, Star Wars was such a serious impact on my life. The prequels were such a gigantic letdown. So coming back to the sequels and enjoying them on some level, it was kind of a nice full circle closure, and I was happy again, and I was pleased. And I get a little frustrated with people who are passionately hateful about new Star Wars because it's like they forgot the prequels. It's like they forgot what happened.
Oh my, I did not forget them, but I'm not going to go down this road because this is going to be another episode. I will leave you with this little kind of hook smattering of what we're going to discuss. For the first 20 minutes of The Force Awakens, I thought I was a child. And then they introduced two characters that I loved and went, wow, I'm bored. So we'll have that conversation later.
Okay. All right.
It was an interesting experience for me, but let's bring it back to what we were talking about.
Sure.
We were talking about after Star Wars. So the Hollywood system now has this experience that they didn't know was possible. People are interested in going to cinema again. People are seeing movies more than once. That the power of word of mouth is huge, and as you were saying, they clamor for not just content but to recreate that success across multiple factions. And you've got cinema, you've got television, you've got literature. I'm even going to say comic books because
Sure.
Even back in the day where it wasn't comic books, like you would go into a specialty store and there was all these little companies, sharing their heart and soul with you. There were two main companies out there. It was DC and Marvel. Marvel had gotten the rights to Star Wars and was continuing the story and was the number one selling comic book for years. In fact, I discovered that the only reason they shut down the original Star Wars comic book line was because Lucasfilm was scared about what George was going to do in the future and didn't want to cross any of those paths. People were still buying the comic book and were engaged in the story years after Return of the Jedi was done. It just, I had a conversation with Mary Jo Duffy, who was the author at the time, and she was saying, we just kept getting vetoed because no one knew where George was going to take it.
Right.
So they kept saying, you can't do that, and they just shut down the ability to tell a story. So, there's this incredible kind of branding that goes on really organically as well. I mean, it's very famous that no one knew what was going to happen. Star Wars is a hit. Kids want merchandise, especially toys. The toy company is completely surprised, so they go and they do this kind of really famous thing where they sell an empty box with the promise that the minute these figures are available, we're going to send them to you first.
The early bird certificate. Certificate.
Hi, I'm Gail Gallagher with the Cinematic Perspective podcast. I love movies. I love music, I love movies, and I hang out with other nerds who also love movies, as if you're listening to this podcast, I'm sure you do as well. And so many times when my friends and I are hanging out, somebody will quote a movie or a song or just say something funny, and I think, oh my God, that should be on a t-shirt. So I started the Alley Clothing Company so that I could share these fun designs with you. And also because one of my goals in life is to save the world, and I know that I can't do it on my own, we partner with different organizations who are saving the world. So go to thealleyclothingco.com. That's THE, alleyclothingco.com. Use promo code PODCAST for 20% off your first purchase.
So Kenna basically sells this empty box to parents saying, here's something you put under your Christmas tree that your kids can get excited. And you don't have it because we can't get it into the stores. But the second it is available, you send in the certificate and we send you all these figures.
And was that Christmas season 77?
Yes.
That same year? Okay. Yes.
They were caught off guard. They were unprepared.
Huh?
Totally unprepared. I mean, there were some posters and t-shirts and some things that could get done short term. But yeah, the toy line and all of that, no.
A lot of merchandise during that time was just putting stickers on previously created things so that they could stick it out the door and say it was a Star Wars thing. So you had Star Wars, give a show projectors, right?
Yeah.
That were made for kids, but they would just go and cut up 35mm prints of the film and put a slide in and then go, that's something we can do. Or, just generic stuff that they could rebrand. I think there was a TIE Fighter X-Wing game where it was like little balls that you would shoot out, and it was a rebrand for a Red Baron game. Oh. And again, it was like Star Wars, and they changed some of the stickers, and they're like, cool, we got that. We can throw that out there. It was a big move, and again, it caught everyone by surprise. And the amazing thing is, you've now got an industry that says, let's see if we can recreate this again and have a little bit more lead-up time because there's money to be made doing this.
Well, then he was able to auction toy rights. Like with the later trilogies, he was like able to put it on the chopping block and, oh, Kenner, you bid $400 million, and Toy Biz, you bid $600 million, and oh, Kenner, you counterbid with $800 million. He was able to actually auction toy rights, which was just amazing.
Yeah, because there was nothing in the merchandise. The merchandise was not, apart from a $6 million man figure that Kenner had created, there was no real tie-ins.
Right.
And you've got this audience that is salivating for more content.
Right.
And that creates almost like a perfect storm at the end of the 70s and going into the 80s, which is, from a cinematic perspective, is an incredibly cool thing for filmmakers and storytellers to start pushing not only the narrative boundaries, but also the technical ones.
Sure. So what then was next on the list of things that came out that were filling that void before Empire?
Well, I want to point out that, there were times in history, there were times in film history where, okay, you did a couple of cool science fiction films. You did Day the Earth Stood Still, and you did Destination Moon and War of the Worlds, and then other studios went, oh, science fiction is lucrative. Okay. So then you had like the wave of science fiction films in the 50s. But I don't think to the level of furor, the craziness. And then, like you mentioned, the Ten Commandments, the biblical cycle. It's like somebody did a big biblical epic, and then everyone went, oh, biblical epics are profitable. So you got a wave of those. And then you got the musicals, which then morphed into the incredibly expensive, epic 3-hour-long musicals, which then ran their course. But again, we didn't have the level of merchandising, people camping out for a month in advance. So you've had things like that happen, but not quite to the degree of Star Wars.
So science fiction really doesn't ever die out. There's always an offering because it's a very, like, the customer base is very loyal. But there's two things holding up science fiction when you look through the years. One is it's expensive to make.
Yes.
You can't really go, unless the concept you're going to be presenting is more cerebral than it is physical, you've got to build an environment. You've got to build a world to build in. And then the other thing was, until Star Wars, it did return, but it didn't return, mega bucks to the studios. So it was like, cool, we gave you a chance. You did a musical Western and a thing for us, and you want to do this science fiction film. All right, go and do it. And you know what? This is the budget. You got to work out how to do it. And you know what? We'll make a little bit back, so we'll justify it. And that's that. But science fiction was always mixed in with a whole lot of things, which is really cool when you go and look back. There's this constant kind of feeding of that genre to the audience. And as we said, the whole premise of this episode is, and then Star Wars happens and it explodes.
Right.
It is a completely different juggernaut. And as a child who was kind of swept up in the spectacle of what he was seeing, it was like, wow, this is all what cinema is. I mean, I remember turning on my television and seeing, science fiction content. I remember going to the cinema and seeing science fiction content. And it wasn't for like 6 months. It was for years. And in fact, when you look at it, the early 80s started going outside the science fiction kind of mold.
Sure,
but still on the tentpole. People were aiming for the tentpole movie.
Yes.
The amazing event, which led to, like, I think the years between 83 and 84 was some of the most classic, most spoken about films of that genre that were just, if you think about trying to pitch a film like that today, people would laugh you out the door.
Well, like what kind of titles?
So I'm thinking of things, something like Tron, which was way beyond its time. David Lasseter, no, not Lasseter, David Lazenberg?
No, you talking about the writer-director?
Yes.
Steven Lisberger.
I'm sorry. I'm so bad with names early in the morning. So like he pitched this idea of life in a computer. Now with the internet and everyone being computer literate, people love that film. It's a cult film. 82, 83 when it was done. People were like, I don't understand what's going on. Why are these programs doing this? What are they fighting for?
Right.
But there was enough there that if you understood, if you were interested in computer games, computers, the way it worked, it became kind of like this flag that you would fly.
Because people wanted in on Star Wars.
Yeah, and the success of that, I'm thinking of a film that people either love this film or hate this film. I've never met someone who's in the middle of it. But The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai is like that was totally designed to be a tentpole movie. That was going to be like the big. It was going to be like Star Wars, Star Trek: The Motion Picture, Ghostbusters, Buckaroo Banzai. It was there to create a mythology in a world, and in a lot of ways it does it. But again, you know what? They were banking on, we don't really understand, but if they can tap into an audience and we've got this, and even at the end of it, it's like, Buckaroo Banzai will return, in the World Crime Caper. And, people are like, what? Never happened.
We're kind of lucky that we survived that era because, it gave us a lot of great stuff, but we're also lucky we didn't burn it out and bankrupt a lot of studios. And because for probably as many hits as there were and as many cool new products as there were a lot of failures. But everybody was just trying to find their footing, and it was growing pain. Taking it back, because Gail mentioned what was next up after Star Wars, I would argue, and I'm sure you would probably agree with this, next up after Star Wars was Battlestar Galactica.
Yes. A guilty pleasure of mine.
But in terms of the time frame and who was able to get there next.
Oh, yeah.
It was Star Wars, and then a lot of other people starting to plan for the future. But the next people up was Universal Studios, and for better or for worse, Battlestar Galactica.
And was that because television was a little more flexible because it was less expensive, or what?
It was great timing.
Great timing.
So Glenn Larson, who had a track record producing television shows. So Glenn Larson, who's shopping around a script called Adam's Ark, which is a science fiction version of Noah's Ark that he had written. And it was basically they were looking for any content that they could put on the screens to kind of fill in this void, get some marketing, get some exposure, sell commercials. That's what television was all about at the time. And Glenn Larson had a really good reputation at the time for a whole lot of TV shows. So, apart from Battlestar Galactica, he did things like Knight Rider and Buck Rogers, which came a little bit after. When Tron came out, he produced a TV show called Automan that built on that idea. The Fall Guy, Manimal, BJ and the Bear. So he had this kind of reputation of being able to put together these TV shows. And I guess the executives at Universal went, hey, you were pitching something like that. Let's turn it around. Let's make it. So Adam's Ark becomes Adama's Ark, that becomes codenamed Galactica, that becomes Battlestar Galactica.
I think somewhere in there was a title called Star Worlds.
Oh, a little too close.
And that was part of the lawsuit. Yeah.
So the first pilot, the movie length that was released around the world, but the 3-part pilot was called Saga of a Star World.
Okay.
Which is what one of the things that kind of got them into trouble, including poaching the crew who had done the effects crew who had done Star Wars and basically is still working in the same studio that they had built with the same equipment, and forms a company called Apogee. And Apogee is hired by Glenn Larson, and for I think the first 4 or 5 episodes, John Dykstra is a producer for Battlestar Galactica.
Well, you touched on something that it's kind of, again, this is an indicator of what was going on at the time. They didn't plan Galactica as a series. They planned Galactica as a series of TV movies. So they basically had like the first 7 hours blocked out as this epic story. And then the ratings were so good, they said, okay, we need to do a series. And they moved right immediately into a series. So people have asked, well, I think...
Was the 7 hours, was that like 3 1-hour movies? Or,
well, it was like
2-hour?
It was like the initial pilot, and then there were like 2 additional like 2-hour movies that then became 7 hours worth of television. But it ended up getting broken up into episodes.
Oh, okay.
But that's what they were initially committed to. in retrospect, Galactica holds up. I think it holds up well, but what happened was they started rushing for episodes and they started writing. And so people have wondered, well, why did Galactica start out so strong and so good and so entertaining and go downhill so fast? It was because they were racing to shoot episodes and put stuff together to go from a 7-hour TV movie commitment to 24 hours of a first season. So they were by the end of it, they were just racing to get ahead of themselves. And they sort of shot themselves in the foot.
Unlike in Australia, you guys have 2 different screening times because you've got the East Coast and the West Coast.
Right.
And in fact, the first Galactica movie was preempted for the David Accords. And what they saw was people stayed on to see the rest of Galactica.
I did.
And it was, again, unheard of. That like people like, get the president off. I want to see what the rest of this movie. Where's this going? Right? As I said, I have a very, very soft spot for Galactica for a number of reasons. One is, as a child, Star Wars hits, but we've got Galactica almost every weekend. It was one season, but it played ad nauseum into the late 80s. So, it hits hard. It's very successful, I think, to begin with. And then the people at Universal who have to make a decision go, this is costing us a fortune.
So Galactica pretty much arguably hits first. It's the first property to pop up after Star Wars. And then I think we start seeing something interesting where there were existing properties that I think got a big boost because of Star Wars. Like Superman, the movie, was in development, but I think after Star Wars hit and they were still shooting Superman, they probably were much less hesitant about, well, let's give this thing money. Let's bolster it. Let's advertise it. Let's market the hell out of it.
Because it's kind of action adventure.
Well, and we've seen the audience take to Star Wars. So we've got Superman, which is kind of science fiction, kind of fantasy, action adventure. Let's not be afraid about pumping money into this thing. So I think Superman gets a boost. But then there are also films like films that are floating around the following summer, 1979. You have a film like Alien.
Yes.
Which was basically 20th Century Fox's follow-up to Star Wars. Admittedly, an R-rated follow-up in a very different way. But I think Alien moves ahead because of Star Wars.
Well, and that kind of combines the space and horror, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, which I don't think we would have seen Alien at the production level it was without Star Wars. It would have been what you were talking about. It would have been one of those bones that they threw people like, well, you've done a couple of cool westerns and you've done a couple of cool cop movies. Yeah, we'll give you a few bucks. Go ahead and make your Alien movie. But because of post Star Wars, they went, no, let's give you an A-list. Let's give you an A-list budget. Let's give you A-list marketing. Let's put it in a bunch of theaters, and boom, another classic.
And do you think that that because of the success of Star Wars and that these studios are now going, oh hey, there's money to be made? Do you think that the marketing aspect of it, that they were putting money out there to actually promote things like Superman and Alien?
Oh, absolutely.
That had an effect on what people went and saw?
Yeah, no, I think that the summer blockbuster didn't really exist until...
Yeah, the tentpole film, yeah.
Jaws, and then it was cemented by Star Wars, and that was kind of the birth of the event film. So even with successful films throughout history, I don't think they'd really put 2 and 2 together with, we're going to market the hell out of this, and then we're going to premiere it, and we're going to create an event. Whether you're ready for an event or not, we're going to make it. So I think Battlestar Galactica being promoted for television, my God, I don't know if I ever remembered seeing something on television maybe Roots, and then Galactica, the cross promotions of, you must tune in Sunday night and see Galactica. And then Superman the movie. My God, the trailers and the posters and things I saw for that were just amazing. So I think they were learning how to build the event, how to make it.
I think something else that's really interesting is that Galactica premieres on television in the US. But for Europe, Australia, and a lot of the world, it's actually marketed as a cinema film. So you could go, it was one of the first films that was, you could go and watch it in what they called Sensorround.
Yes.
So, it was this deep rumbling speakers they put in the cinema. I think it was Earthquake and then Battlestar Galactica.
And it did get released in the United States as a feature with Sensurround, but it didn't get released in the United States till the following summer. I remember seeing Galactica in the theaters, but it was a year later after it had been released on television.
I actually think that Battlestar Galactica is one of the reasons why we have a Star Trek movie series.
Star Trek the Motion Picture is an obsession of mine that I've been studying for years and doing research on, and
we can do a whole episode.
Yeah, we
on
do a
that,
whole
right?
episode on Star Trek. But needless to say, the short version is that Star Trek went back and forth so many times, and it's like it got canceled, then it went into syndication, then the popularity started building again in syndication, and then conventions started happening, and the Star Trek marketing hit, and the franchising of all the Star Trek stuff started really growing. And then Paramount in like the mid-70s started this schizophrenic sort of, it's going to be a TV movie. No, it's going to be a TV series. No, it's going to be a theatrical film. No, it's going to be a TV series. And they went back and forth until Star Wars hit, and some genius at the studio said, it's got to be a theatrical film, and it's got to be this, and here's all this money. And then the crazy mess that was the production of Star Trek the Motion Picture is a whole separate story that isn't related to Star Wars. But again, Star Wars was basically the impetus that made them go, okay, Star Trek, a motion picture in the theaters, lots of money, here, we can bank on this. Star Wars did it, we can do it.
For me too, again, not being as big of a Star Trek nerd as you guys, but when that movie came out and my brothers and I went to the theater to see it, there was something, even though I had never seen the original when it was first running, it was always just the reruns.
Right.
There was something nostalgic about seeing those characters when they first show up on screen that was really, really cool.
It was absolutely awesome. And if you actually look at it, Hollywood's now learned its lesson, because when Star Trek the Motion Picture comes out, there's tie-ins with Burger King, McDonald's. There's merchandising everywhere. It is, they're releasing figures and models, and it is like well before the film's even out.
So they learned.
They learned very quickly, and I believe it was McDonald's that they had a tie-in with. And I recently just saw they had Happy Meals, but they were Happy Meals that were themed on Star Trek the Motion Picture. So they had like pictures of transporters, and you had to guess who was being transported up. It was a really interesting. Like, you're marketing this for children, but the movie's not for children at all. It's actually for the audience that grew up in the 60s watching Star Trek and loved it. So you had this kind of really amazing kind of moment. But yeah, that film, comes out. It's a financial success, but the audience goes, this wasn't what I expected. It's not Star Wars.
I kind of want to compartmentalize the Christmas era of 1979. The Christmas season of 1979 is its own special kind of a thing. And we were talking about Alien, which was the summer of 79.
Sure.
So we had Battlestar Galactica in late 78, and then so now everybody's starting to catch up. Everybody's starting to catch up on their Star Wars fanaticism, and all the studios are starting to get their products out there now. But Star Wars was so huge that in the same year, 1977, the James Bond film, The Spy Who Loved Me, was released. And at the end of The Spy Who Loved Me, it said, James Bond will return in For Your Eyes Only. Well, For Your Eyes Only was not the next film, because Star Wars was so huge, they went, you know what, let's put For Your Eyes Only off. Let's make the next film be Moonraker.
So they could do a sci-fi...
So they literally bumped the sequence of Bond films so that in 1979, Star Wars was such a huge influence, it changed the course of the James Bond films so that their next one would be Moonraker, just so they could cash in on Star Wars. So that's a pretty significant thing. But I really feel like the winter of 1979, the Christmas season, we started to get the apex of the good and bad results, because you started to get like Star Trek the Motion Picture and 1941, which was a Spielberg epic, but then you started to get shit like The Black Hole.
Whoa. But you cannot talk badly about Black Hole number one. I agree with you, but let's go back one step. So 1978, Star Wars comes out 77.
Right.
People move really, really quickly. So you have films like Laser Blast that comes out, which again is a low budget film that is there basically to try and capitalize on being released as a B movie with something else to feed that audience. You have things like Star Crash, which we've spoken about before.
Star Crash, yes.
The Italian love letter to Star Wars.
Which was probably the apex of the exploitational aspect of let's rip off Star Wars.
Is that the one that has like the robot with a southern accent?
Yes.
Okay.
Which is both one of the worst films ever made and one of the worst excuses for exploitation, and also one of the most entertaining, silly pieces of filmmaking ever to exist. I ultimately end up loving the film, knowing exactly what it is.
If it wasn't for the John Barry score, who went on to do a lot of the James Bond,
right,
that film would not have worked as well as it did. And you're right, there's a guilty pleasure.
Yeah.
It almost gets to a line in it where you go, wow, the production value is actually, I forget this is an Italian cheapie. It's fun also because it had an incredible cast that you didn't expect to turn up. So, it was I believe David Hasselhoff's first cinema.
David Hasselhoff, Christopher Plummer. Good God, Christopher Plummer.
Did that one have a different title originally as well?
It was always either Star Crash or
Stella?
The Adventures of Stella Star.
Okay.
But I think here in the United States, at least, it got released as Star
Crash.
Crash. Yeah.
You also had things like Death Sport, which was the Roger Corman kind of science fiction, David Carradine. Again, it's kind of interesting because you can see the influence Star Wars has on it. It's really motorcycles in the I'm going to say the bush because I'm in Australia, but in scrublands in the States. It's the future. They're kind of like samurais, but now they've got these blaster guns that they can shoot people because that's what you have to have.
But I think what you're kind of emphasizing here, what you're kind of pointing out, whether intentionally or unintentionally, is, with a lot of exploitation in the past, you might get a film like The French Connection, and then you got a bunch of low-budget ripoffs of, like, violent cop dramas. You got the very explicit Roger Cormans and the Italian filmmakers, and after Jaws, the Italians made Tentacles and this and that and Great White Jaws of Death. You expected the exploitation people to step up and do this. What was different about Star Wars, though, was it was the exploitation film companies like the Roger Cormans and the Italians, but it was also the big guys were stepping in too. I mean, you had every major studio in Hollywood, so you had the exploitation pumping out the crap, but then you had the other studios trying to jump on the bandwagon too, which I've never seen. Maybe with the religious epics, and probably the musicals, you saw other studios wading in. But I've never seen anything like Star Wars for Disney wants in on it, and Universal wants in on it.
Right.
And, Warner Brothers wants in on it. Everybody wanted in on this. It wasn't like, let's just let Roger Corman do his thing. No, everybody wanted a piece of this, and big money. Hey, this is Wyatt Weed from the Cinematic Perspective podcast. Now, if you've been listening to the podcast, you know that we make movies. But what you may not know is that we also help other filmmakers distribute their films. Contamination is a documentary that examines sci-fi and pop culture conventions, fans, and the fan culture they inspire. Filmed at the Contamination Convention in St. Louis and directed by Corey Logsdon, it features interviews with Tony Todd, Kane Hodder, the cast of Roger Corman's Fantastic Four, and even adult film star Seika. Next is The First Secret City, an essential documentary for viewers interested in environmental issues, history of World War II, and how decisions made decades ago continue to impact citizens today. Past meets present as a group of seemingly unrelated people discover alarming proof of radioactive contamination that goes back to the creation of the Manhattan Project. Both of these films can be seen or purchased at piratemediagroup.net.
Too much money was being generated. And, in 78, there's a direct parody of Star Wars that gets released. It's only 13 minutes long, and it does amazing, called Hardware Wars.
Which was arguably the first fan film. It was a parody, but it was also a fan film. Yeah.
You're now acknowledging what you're creating. And from what I understand, these films are, they're kind of like the shorts before the main feature. So they've got an audience, and they're, people I've heard stories that people went to see movies just to see the Hardware Wars thing and then walked out.
I did. I mean, there was a time, like we've talked in the past about, the only way to see something was a theater locally was advertising, oh, we're going to show a 16 millimeter print of the making of Star Wars, or we're going to show a 16 millimeter print of the Star Trek bloopers. Well, there wasn't YouTube back then. There wasn't streaming back then. So I remember specifically going to a science fiction convention and going to the movie room because we knew they had a print of Hardware Wars and the Wizard of Speed and Time, and they were going to show them.
Oh yeah, Mike Jitlov.
Yeah, so
It's really interesting that 78 they're trying to get everything together, but by 79 they've got their act together. So you got Alien, you got the motion picture Star Trek, the motion picture Moonraker is coming out, Meteor, which is a horrible film with an incredible cast. So you have Sean Connery, 007 himself, and Natalie Wood, as well as other. And I mean, that film is very hard to watch. Great special effects, but the story is terrible. Like, it's just really, really horrible. You've got some really interesting stuff, and these are the big films that they're marketing. They want them to come out, and they want them to do well.
I would consider Christmas season of 1979 the apex of the good and bad of Star Wars and the influence of Star Wars. And some of these films came earlier than Christmas, and some of these films came a little later. But Christmas of 1979, you had probably Meteor, Saturn III, The Black Hole, and Star Trek the Motion Picture. Now, Star Trek the Motion Picture would be the one that was arguably the most successful. It benefited from Star Wars in that it got the budget and it got the promotion. There are issues to Star Trek the Motion Picture, which we can spend a whole episode on. Black Hole. To me, the thing that's interesting about the Black Hole is, again, like Alien and like Superman the movie, the Black Hole was a film at Disney that had been in development for a very long time in various forms, as early as 1975, 1976. But it changes and morphs and transforms because of Star Wars. And the emphasis gets put on the visual effects. The budget gets upped significantly. But I also think that Black Hole is interesting in all of this because it represents sort of the beginning of Disney's growing pains, where Disney all throughout this, Walt dies, and then Disney throughout the 70s becomes this very formulaic sort of family comedy factory, and the animated features are not at the level of success that they were. So I think they very much switch gears and decide, we need to start appealing to an adult audience. We need to get out of our own way, and we need to do some cool stuff. And Black Hole represents an attempt. And then there are more attempts down the road, like The Last Flight of Noah's Ark, which was a weird kind of adventure film with Elliot Gould. And there was The Watcher in the Woods, which was this just unbelievably mismanaged and mangled science fiction film. And this goes on for quite a while until really the mid-'80s, where Disney finally launches Touchstone Films and starts doing genuinely adult-oriented fare. And then they have their animation renaissance in the late 80s, starting with, The Little Mermaid and so forth. But I have a soft spot for the Black Hole for a lot of reasons. I'm sure younger people have a soft spot for it. But it is equal parts brilliant inspiration and absolute disaster all in one package. It really is something else.
So The Black Hole is Disney's first PG-rated movie.
Yes.
And is actually released under Buena Vista as opposed to Disney.
Yeah.
So everyone knew it was a Disney film, but it's still like they didn't release it under Disney's branding as such. The Black Hole, I have a very soft spot for it. I remember going and seeing it. You both of you know that, last year I kind of messaged you and said, there happens to be some toys released in the States. Can you grab them for me? That are based on that that film. Definitely, you can see the Disney influences, especially on the robots, especially with the big eyes. There was something that, again, design-wise, they just couldn't get working. And in the end, they went, let's go back to what we know, what we're known for. And that's characters with huge eyes. They definitely didn't know how to finish that film. It was one of those things, again, it's the Star Wars syndrome of going into production and we'll work it out. I agree with you. You can see the good and the bad influences on Star Wars. There's this huge gunfight between the Century robots and some of the crew and the robots, and it just goes too long. And you're like, this is put in there because this is their kind of analogy of like Han and Luke running around the Death Star. Like, that's exactly what this scene is.
Yeah, it's like if you don't understand the dynamics of what made the first version successful, you're not gonna. It's like
mimic. You mean Star Wars? Like
yeah,
okay,
yeah. I look at Phantom Menace and I see the incredible long drawn out pod race sequence, which is basically a direct lift from Ben-Hur, and Ben-Hur is exciting and riveting and dramatic as hell. But it's like they didn't listen to any of the reasons why that scene worked when they recreated it. So yeah, Black Hole, like, we're going to be Star Wars in this scene without having any idea what made Star Wars work. And that kind of speaks to a lot of what we're talking about post-Star Wars, is trying to recreate Star Wars without having a proper sense of why it was successful. And I think that's a reason why I think films like Alien and or Superman the movie are so successful, because they were using the influence of and the benefits of Star Wars without trying to mimic Star Wars. You know, because Alien was its own separate animal, Superman was its own separate animal. To a large degree, Star Trek was too. Star Trek more mimicked 2001: A Space Odyssey than anything else. But yeah, and the films that tried to be Star Wars without understanding what the hell it was about, they kind of got hammered.
There are some amazing moments in the Black Hole, like visually when they're running across a bridge and there's an asteroid that's tearing through. I mean, like, you could see they actually had the ability, if they had kept on their own vision, I think it's when they went, you know, when we know we're not Star Wars, but we're gonna pander and try to be, is when it kind of fell down. And there's a lot of films that kind of did that.
Let me sum up the Black Hole for you. You will hate this, but I think you will understand it. I went and saw the Black Hole. No, I went and saw the Black Hole with, I think, some friends and my older brother. I had two brothers. This was the middle brother. So he was older than me, but he was not the oldest brother. So I went and saw, and my older brother was very pragmatic and basic and just like, he wasn't simple-minded, but he just didn't screw around with a lot of shit. And it was like he either liked it or he didn't, or it was cool or it wasn't. He didn't want to ponder all the details and all the significant little threads of shit. He just either liked it or he didn't. And I remember walking out of the Black Hole and I wanted to sort of get my head around it and sort of figure out what I missed, or maybe there was more to this, or trying to understand what happened with this film. And he just simply went, it sucked. And that was kind of it in a nutshell. It was like, it just sucked. It's like sometimes I talk to my mother and she goes, I hated that film. And I'm like, why? And she goes, I don't know. I just hated it. And it's like, that's unfortunately what it boils down to sometimes is, well, what about the this and the that and the yeah, no, it sucked.
Dude, Anthony Perkins got blended by a 7-foot red robot, and then his corpse fell on electrical cables for a Disney film.
Yeah, I know.
We're talking Disney now. We're talking Disney when it was like Bambi and stuff.
I know.
Like, I mean, that was awesome.
So we've got this whole Christmas of 1979 thing, and a little earlier in the season we had Meteor.
Oh,
which Meteor is the antithesis of Star Trek: The Motion Picture, because whereas Star Trek: The Motion Picture had a horribly challenging production that almost didn't succeed, but then at the last minute they managed to pull it all together and they managed to make it happen. Meteor was the failure. Meteor was the example of where our effects are falling apart, our budget's going to hell in a handbasket, we don't know what's going on, and we finished the movie, but we didn't finish it well, and the visual effects aren't good, and we've abandoned a bunch of visual effects, and we've hired people at the last minute to cobble stuff together. And Meteor then ends up being sort of the example of, well, this is what happens when you fail to meet your production.
Oh, yeah.
So slightly after Christmas season of 79 is a movie called Saturn III.
Oh yeah,
Saturn III came out, and again, it's like science fiction. I have to go see it. And I raced off to the theater, and I kind of sat there in the theater and went, huh?
Kirk Douglas? You didn't like seeing Kirk Douglas's butt? Come on.
Oh, I'm putting that on my list.
It's a film that I've grown to like. It's a film that I've grown to appreciate now as an adult. But again, here we are, post-Star Wars period, and you want to make a Star Wars movie? You want to make something with production value and visual effects and name actors? Cool. Here's a pile of money. Here's a reputable director. Here's name talent. Here's Harvey Keitel, Farrah Fawcett at the height of her fame. Here's Kirk Douglas, and it was a head-scratcher. And like I say, I enjoy it now. But at the time, again, here's people racing off post-Star Wars boom to go and see Meteor and go, huh? They go and see Black Hole. They go, huh? They go and see Saturn III, and they're like...
There's also another really interesting thing, kind of offshoot from Saturn III, which was there was a novel called Money that was written.
Yes.
And it was basically kind of documenting the disaster that was the production of Saturn III.
Yeah, I need to read that book because I know it's a fictionalized account, but it's basically based on,
I've read it many times, and I think you'll enjoy it.
So now we're up into the 1980s. We're into 1980, and of course, the follow-up to Star Wars hits, Empire Strikes Back, which we all know Empire Strikes Back, and we all know what Empire Strikes Back is.
I don't know what that film is.
Yeah, I know. You mentioned Star Crash, and you mentioned like some low-budget Roger Corman stuff. I feel like there was the Star Wars exploitation that didn't work. And then there was the Star Wars exploitation that did. And I look at something like Battle Beyond the Stars.
Oh, you see, we're thinking the same thing. I was going to go Battle Beyond the Stars, Roger Corman, redoing the Seven Samurai. There's a lot. That film's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. And
it's an early film where James Cameron was working on visual effects. It's a film. It almost for once feels like Roger Corman, rather than just insisting on the bottom line and get this film done in 5 days and don't spend a lot of money on it and use what I already have. He said, here's your limited budget, but then he let them go and make the best film they possibly could for the amount of money that they had. And I remember Battle Beyond the Stars came out like the fall after The Empire Strikes Back, and I saw it 2 or 3 times in the theaters because I wanted science fiction. I needed a diet of special effects and science fiction. So Battle Beyond the Stars was it. It was playing at the local theater, and when I was bored, zip off to the theater, go see Battle Beyond the Stars.
So my younger self would get disappointed that it wasn't Star Wars. Like, I'd want the same experience, and it didn't just deliver. But I remember seeing Battle Beyond the Stars at the cinema. I remember, you were talking about that James Cameron. It was his first kind of job as a model maker for it. He came up with the design of the spaceship, the main spaceship Nell, which is a very interesting story in its own right because Roger Corman kept vetoing all the spaceship designs. And they had made something like 20 designs and he didn't like any of them. So James Cameron said, don't worry about it. This next one he'll love. So he actually designed a ship with boobs.
Well, it was the torso of a woman. It's the torso of a woman, yeah.
And Roger Corman went, I like it. And it was cool. Nell still exists, by the way. I got to see Nell in the basement of Digital Domain.
This kind of brings to mind an interesting point that all of this that we're talking about, from Star Wars through the 80s, the visual effects and sort of the production value of all these films that we're talking about, they still have a very handcrafted feel. That even though computers and motion control are involved and new levels of visual effects, James Cameron on something like Battle Beyond the Stars, he was matte painting, he was building miniatures, he was learning motion control systems, he was sculpting. Those guys were doing, that's where our background is. And I know how to do all that stuff. And now it's, a computer terminal and ones and zeros. Back then, you knew lenses, you knew the camera, you knew the motion control system, the blue screen setup, the miniatures, the sculpting, the mold making process, how to mix and pour resin. The artistry back then, CGI is an art form, and CGI can do some amazing things. All of these films, well into the 90s, had a handcrafted feel to them. I was arguing with somebody the other day about the validity of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. But one thing I do admit, where I defend Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, you look at Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it's such a handcrafted, physical movie. And then you look at Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and it exists in the digital world. There are visual effects shots and things in that film that couldn't be done in 1981, but shouldn't have been done in 2008. And that's the difference. You look at Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and you go, I find it entertaining. But it does not feel like a classic Indiana Jones film because it's a digital film.
I do want to share something, a film that I enjoyed as a child, but as I got older, I found more and more love for it. But again, it was like I wanted Star Wars, or I wanted a continuation of Empire Strikes Back. But this film, in fact, last year, in the middle of a pandemic, happened to be that there was a 70mm screening of this film on my birthday, and I went down, and that happens to be Flash Gordon.
Ah, yeah.
You know, talk about full circle when it comes to Star Wars. Lucas wanted to do Flash Gordon, couldn't get the rights to it. Flash Gordon is literally made because of the success of Star Wars. As a kid, I'm like, I don't get this. I don't understand why, like, the visual effects thing and all the rest of it. It should be like Star Wars. And then as an adult, I'm like, oh man, I get it. You're paying homage to the original artwork of the movie and all the. I had such a joy of seeing it in 70mm.
So now with Flash Gordon, we've moved to like December of 1980. We're like 6 months past Empire now. And Flash Gordon has a point of view. It has a style. It has its own thing. But I think it's so hard to see that when you're in the shadow of The Empire Strikes Back.
I agree.
Seeing it now, like you said, it's like, wow, this is fun, this is silly, this is campy, this is really entertaining, the design sensibility is fantastic. But yeah, seeing it post-Empire was just like, what?
It's not as gritty, it's kind of goofy, it's got an amazing cast.
And I want to say it was shot by the same guy who shot Star Wars. I want to say Gil Taylor.
Gil Taylor?
Shot Star Wars and also shot Flash Gordon, I believe. And then the music, oh good lord, the music by Queen, which wasn't all by Queen, but, Brian May and Queen.
That's one of my favorite soundtracks. Queen did two film soundtracks, Flash Gordon and Highlander.
Oh, sure, yeah, sure.
And both of those are incredible. Flash Gordon, that's a film where, if I've got a fever and I'm terribly, I'm sick and I've got the flu, and I want something that's going to make me feel good, I go to Thunderbirds episodes and Flash Gordon.
Which kind of feel very similar.
As my partner says to me, she always says, I know if you love a film if you start quoting it in real life. Like, that's how I know your level of film. And I think there was a time where I got introduced to some people, and someone introduced themselves and started running through their their resume. Like, they were trying to say to me, this is, I'm a big deal. And I think I kind of, without missing a beat, stuck my hand out, shook his hand and said, Gil Poznanski, quarterback, New York Jets.
So now we're getting into 1981, and we're not going to be able to go year by year forever, but we get into 1981, and I think what starts happening in 1981 is we start getting to equilibrium. We start getting to balance, because I think now we're getting...
I don't know.
Well, we're starting to get films that are post-Star Wars and benefiting from the experimental sort of, let's give you some money because we may have another hit here. And they're not all hits, but I think we're starting to see some really solid stuff. We're starting to see more Disney. Early in 81, you've got Dragon Slayer. You've got Excalibur.
Okay.
You've got films like that. But
so not science fiction, more fantasy kind of stuff.
Escape from New York?
Escape from New York, yeah. You're starting to get post-Star Wars science fiction that's now cycling around to be...
heavy metal?
You talked about it earlier. People are trying to establish an event. And so I think even stuff like Raiders of the Lost Ark, you don't necessarily see the Star Wars influence on it, but you see the power of someone like Lucas and Spielberg coming together, and 20th Century Paramount going, we could have another thing on our hands here. And they did. So I think you're starting, because even jumping forward to something silly like Beverly Hills Cop, Beverly Hills Cop, that doesn't seem to relate to Star Wars, but Beverly Hills Cop is very definitely, can we set up a franchise here? And then people latch onto this franchise. So I think...
Well, was that one intended to be a franchise when they started, do you think? Or do you think that...
No.
They kept that in mind, though? I mean, because...
No, but I think that's what happened post-Star Wars, was that anything could then be considered a franchise. Like, something could come out of left field and succeed, and you went, well, we're not just going to leave it there. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. Like, more Indiana Jones, good. More Escape from New York, maybe not such a good idea. So, but I think just the fact that they could look at something and say, oh, well, this made $500 million. Let's give you more of it.
1981 is also interesting because Star Wars is a huge hit, Alien's a huge hit, and 81, there's 2 movies that are released almost to capitalize the idea of science fiction horror based on Alien. So the first one I want to bring up is Galaxy of Terror.
Sure.
Which is an interesting film. Again, I have this whole kind of interest of cinema, not just good cinema, but also kind of where things might have fallen short. And Galaxy of Terror was one of those films that for some reason I got in my head it was terrible and would scare me. And then I eventually kind of put it in there and I was like, I'm going to watch it with like my finger on the stop button, just if it gets too intense. And the first kind of 40 minutes, I'm like, this has got, I like what they're trying to do here.
It's a film that I've grown to really appreciate over time. I think I like it more as an adult now.
Right. And I think that I would definitely say the same. It's got some really interesting cast. Probably the only thing that I know Erin Morgan to be in outside of Happy Days.
Right.
Shortcake? And Aliens? What? I'm like, okay.
Who suffers a really horrible, brutal death.
In that movie?
Oh, yeah. Horrible, graphic, brutal death.
All of them do.
And then another James Cameron movie, or not a James Cameron movie, but a movie where he was a strong design presence and a strong visual effects presence. I mean, you can kind of connect the dots between Galaxy of Terror and his Alien movie, Aliens.
Absolutely.
The design sensibility, the look, yeah, I mean, it's there.
Even the characters, the idea that they're Rangers as opposed to the Marines.
You've got Alien, which kind of was able to springboard on the success of Star Wars, but now you've got films that are sort of cannibalizing Alien and Star Wars, and so now these things are all starting to become amalgams of all these different things. So by the time you get to the end of the 80s, you've got films that have a little bit of Alien and a little bit of this and a little bit of Star Wars and a little bit of that, and they really start to get twisted up. I think by the time, it's interesting because when we finish out the 80s, I feel like what has happened, and as far as my opinion is that what has happened is, regardless of success or failure, it feels to me like Star Wars sort of just permanently installed science fiction. And some people would argue that Star Wars isn't science fiction, it's fantasy, it's space opera, and that is true. But what it did was, I think it sort of legitimized science fiction finally, once and for all, where science fiction is not going to go away.
Right. Yeah.
I'm glad that it didn't die off. Star Wars isn't popular anymore. We're not going to make science fiction films.
No, it was always around.
Even when the original trilogy ended, the studios kept doing it. Now, it was probably just as much in pursuit of box office and tent poles.
Absolutely.
But they kept doing it, and I like that. I like that a lot.
Talking about the amalgamation of films and kind of the children, in 81, there's also another film that I really enjoy. I saw it as, young, I didn't really get it, and as an adult, I've really enjoyed it, and that's Peter Hymes's Outland, which is just a retelling of High Noon.
Sure.
Sean Connery playing a marshal on, I think it's one of the Jupiter moons.
Io.
And is a really strong film. But again, marketed and repackaged as a science fiction film, telling the same story that has been around for years. But
because of Star Wars and because of the post-Star Wars boom,
they set it in space.
We'll set it in space. We'll give it visual effects. We'll give it a different spin, and that was really cool. I really enjoyed that. It's I don't know what made me think of this all of a sudden, but I think because of the big science fiction post-Star Wars boom, you got riffs on other science fiction films, like Inner Space was a film I've always enjoyed with Martin Short and Dennis Quaid, which is basically a comedy riff on Fantastic Voyage.
Yes.
That a genre is strong enough and a wave is strong enough that you can do riffs on other things within the genre. That's pretty amazing. I mean, obviously it's so heavy-handed and it's so, just clunk you over the head, but that we got a film...
What's Spaceballs?
Spaceballs, which was, a parody, a takeoff on Star Wars, that when a genre has risen to a level where Mel Brooks takes a stab at it, that's pretty significant.
Hey there, film lovers. I hope you're really enjoying this episode of Cinematic Perspective, but I wanted to take a moment out and share with you a brand new project I'm super excited about. It's called Spectacular Distraction, where I uncover hidden gems and forgotten classics from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. The movies and shows that shaped pop culture, but somehow slipped through the cracks. Remember those films that only aired once or twice, disappeared completely, but got stuck in your head? We'll find them, break them down. The rip-offs, the inspirations, and we'll go through and find out all the different pieces that are missing from cinema today. So if you're as obsessed with cinema and pop culture as I am, come on a nostalgic journey with me. Search for Spectacular Distraction on YouTube, hit subscribe, and never miss out on a hidden gem, deep dives, or iconic moments. Because everything else is just Spectacular Distraction. They're still talking about the sequel. Like, literally, they're talking about,
A Spaceballs 2?
Well, Spaceballs the sequel.
So Spaceballs 2, The Search for More Money, which is
The
what
Search
he
for More
actually
Money.
says
Yeah.
in the film.
Yeah.
That's the working title. So
I'd love to see it. I'd absolutely love to see it.
we're only up to 1981. So I think we're going to have to come and revisit this again.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I think we've covered what I was hoping to cover, which is, sort of the influence and then what happened and the transformation. There are more things we could discuss.
Well, not like there's so many films that can be discussed.
But I definitely think we kind of got the gist of what Star Wars did. Star Wars and the original trilogy did to not only science fiction, but to films in general, tentpole summer
Marketing,
releases,
studios.
marketing, the money. I mean, the money gets weird on down the road, and that's a separate episode where we talk about how distorted the money has become, because 10 to 20, $30 million films were big films back in the 80s, and if they made a couple of $100 million, that was hugely successful. The game has changed very much since then. And then a lot of the films you talk about, a film could not be successful in the theaters and then go into video rental and cable and more than make up its money. It's such a different game now, and unfortunately it's changed the type of movies that you, the viewers and the listeners, are getting. Because, back then, they'd give John Carpenter $6 million and say, yeah, go make your Escape from New York. And John Carpenter would go get to make this creative, incredible film. And nowadays, if John Carpenter asked for $6 million, they'd laugh in his face. I mean, they want to remake Escape from New York. And I guarantee you, they remade RoboCop and they spent like $120 million doing a RoboCop remake when the original was like a $15 million low-budget miracle.
I wouldn't buy that for $1.
Yeah.
Blade Runner 2049. You've got Blade Runner, which is arguably a classic for a variety of reasons, but wasn't hugely successful in its day. But we're talking about like a $25 million film. So then years later, 30 plus years later, they say, we're going to make a sequel to Blade Runner. We're going to spend $175 million on a sequel to a film that wasn't particularly successful to begin with. I'm sorry, excuse me, what? And I loved Blade Runner 2049. I think it's a beautiful, amazing film, but it's just, the sensibility. I'm a guy who would want to go to a studio and say, look, just give me $500,000. I want to do a modern, low-budget remake of Dark Star, but make it better. And they would look at me and go, $500,000? That's ridiculous.
I want to be Pinback. That's all I'm saying. I'm Pinback. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
20th Century Fox made so much money out of Star Wars, they funded a lot of projects that didn't return money.
That is true.
And they still broke it. And a lot of studios could do that. If you had a film that hit, and I think that's one of the reasons why we got so many amazing pieces of work, where it was like, the return's enough. I can go make 5 films and let them flop, because I've still got money in the bank. I can return to my investors, and I've still got enough money in the kitty to go and work on a number of different films.
They let Bill Murray make The Razor's Edge because they knew they had Ghostbusters. I mean, that's pretty amazing. That's pretty astonishing stuff there.
Ironically, the Thing also was released the same year that E.T. came out, and I'm assuming that there's two very different alien films right there. There's one that's like phone home, and the other one's trying to hide inside you.
We'll have to have a whole episode on discussing The Thing because I am somebody who has. I think The Thing is a very entertaining film.
It's an amazing film.
I think it has a lot of problems, and I think fans over the years have built more legend and assumed more things and created more backstory and details than are actually in the film. I think the film is much more simplistic and far less complex than all the fans imagine it to be.
Oh, yeah.
Right, but I think E.T. definitely hurt The Thing. I think E.T. hit it hard. And here's this funny, cute little thing that all the family loves, and then here's John Carpenter over here, peeling people's faces off, and yeah, people were like, "No, I don't want to see that. I want to see E.T. get his heart light glowing and touch shit and bring it back to life."
Okay, this will be another episode too, but
where's the Neil Diamond song for the Alien? Alien
for
from
the
Thing? That's
Thing.
what I want to know.
Yeah,
I was like,
well,
rip
that
off
and
your face now. Sorry,
we needed Johnny Cash singing some kind of a hardcore rock and roll Western song about John Carpenter's The Thing. And they called it The Thing.
I cut myself today to see if I could feel. I mean, I can see the shots right there. It would be amazing.
I was going to say this will be something we can talk about in a future episode. But with E.T., I don't know if that was the first one, but that one had really blatant product placement.
True.
With the Reese's Pieces. And so, yeah, I don't know if that's something that would be a whole nother topic.
And I don't know if they were trying to... I think the storyline was there needs to be a candy that Elliot lures E.T. with, and I feel like they went to somebody else first, and they said no. And then Reese's Pieces said yes. So it wasn't like they said, "Oh, it has to be this."
Oh, sure. It was just whatever was available.
But yeah, so whoever said no to them, like it was Skittles or whoever it was, whoever said no to them is probably kicking themselves in the ass.
Talking about product placement, and this is something that I always giggle, because of the fact that E.T. was so popular, there's at least two films that I know which are based around aliens. Oh, well, one's an alien one's a horror film. Where there's an E.T. doll that gets trashed.
Oh, sure.
So the first one is in The Dead Zone, which is David Cronenberg's film. There's a sequence where there's a fire in a girl's room, and they had to reshoot it because she had an E.T. doll, and Universal wanted to sue.
Okay.
Because the doll gets burnt in the fire.
Wow.
She had all these like stuffed toys. And the other one that I remember, and they kept it in, which is awesome, is another New Line Cinema film called Critters, where it's a fun kind of alien film where these critters come and attack a family, and one of these critters is talking to an ET doll, and he's talking to him. He's like, "Where you from? You can come with us. We're gonna get out of here." And eventually, like, rips its head off, and the stuffing comes out, and just shakes his head and leaves. E.T. became kind of like, if we're going to meet aliens, they're all going to love us, and we're all going to help them out, and the world's going to be a beautiful place. And like, filmmakers were like, no, aliens are going to come and kill us. Like, they're going to come and like decimate us. So they kept kind of creating these scenes where E.T. was just absolutely decimated by these aliens that were visiting us. It was a lot of fun.
And there's a whole nother road to go down where Spielberg was developing E.T. and another version called Night Skies about the bad aliens who do all the horrible experimentation. Oh. And Night Skies eventually just sort of got buried and put away, but the legend of Night Skies is out there.
If I remember correctly, Night Skies became a TV miniseries, but it was called Intruders.
Okay.
So he did develop that idea, and it was Steven Spielberg Presents. I think it's Intruders.
But that was a huge thing that involved a lawsuit and involved, a falling out with Rick Baker and all kinds of stuff.
Intruders did?
Night Skies did.
Okay.
Yeah, Night Skies.
Ironically, of all Spielberg's films, E.T. is the one that I don't like the most.
And we're ending this podcast right now.
Yes. No. That's one of the things that I love, because people go, E.T., it's a genius film. Yeah. every time I go back to revisit it, I go, you've got to have, mist everywhere because you didn't have sets. I find it just visually, it's like really, really sloppy. Cinema from a cinematography point of view.
It's a small film. It was like a $10 million film. It was a huge success, but you look at it and it was like he had this much and he shot this much and he made it very quickly, and it was like a $10 million movie.
Like, there are times where I'll watch the film, there's a point where I'll get up and I'll just walk away. I'm like, cool, this is all, it's too schmaltzy. It's like for Spielberg.
It's very schmaltzy. Yeah.
It was the beginning of Spielberg going, "Oh, I have your heart with a string.
Let me that." Yeah.
And he kind of got to a point in the 80s where he was really horrible about that, and then he sort of came back to form.
It was like, we're going to go see this film that everyone's talking about. It's this kid's film with aliens, and it's beautiful, and it's this and the other. And I just remember going, you know what? If I was Elliot, this is not how it would go down. It's just like, this is not how it would go down.
Gil's like, I want to see some blood and guts.
Yeah.
I want to see some faces ripped off.
You know what? It'd be scary. Yeah, we would kill E.T. and gone like, how's he work? No, it's just one of those things that, as I got older, I didn't mellow into the film as much as I have in other films that didn't work. It actually went the other way. It's like the spectacle of childhood is now ripped away, and I'm like, yeah, this is sloppy. And when they re-released, like, they did the shots of E.T.'s, the alien ship coming back, I was just like, I'm not sitting through fucking Lucas's revisiting on a film that I don't like already. It's like, oh.
Spielberg has actually kind of admitted that was a mistake, and he's like taken out some of those remastered shots and put back in the originals. He like took out the guns. Like, he didn't like the fact that the police officers were waiting for E.T. and the kids on the bikes with guns at the end of the street.
They took that out?
And there was a version where he put in some CGI shots of E.T. like flopping around and walking. And then he put walkie-talkies in their hands. And then he put it back. Like, oh, no, that wasn't... I mean, it still got re-released and it still made millions more dollars. But he went, no, that's... It's like he did the special edition of Close Encounters and then went... Nah, I don't want to see the inside of the mothership. I don't want Richard Dreyfuss inside the mothership. Let me recut a new version that takes that part out. So I give at least Spielberg the credit that, sometimes he goes, no, unlike Lucas, he goes, maybe I made a mistake. Lucas just goes, no, that's how I meant that to be. Spielberg goes, I screwed that up. Let's put that back.
I was just going to say, that's what Close Encounters is such a different feel. Same topic. An alien's coming to Earth and communicating, but Close Encounters has a more serious vibe and a scary vibe, especially when this whole sequence with the lights going into the house and the kid disappearing. It's almost Jaws with the tension, and it's like, even though you get to the end and you realize these guys are they've returned all the people, And Richard Dreyfuss's character is now picked to go along with them, and he's going to be okay, and all the rest of it. It still has that kind of edge that I think E.T. definitely doesn't have.
Right.
You hit me up on Twitter and Instagram and be like, Gil, you're out of your mind. That's fine. Or maybe, you know what? Maybe maybe I've got to go and sit down with a camera in front of me so I can make faces and be like, oh, I hate that. Why is there all fog in that shot? You can see, just like open up the lens a little bit.
In Gil's world, the scientists are the heroes in that film.
Oh, yeah.
Gil's rooting for the scientists, going, yeah, cut him open!
I want to pitch right now, if they can do it to the Karate Kid and make Cobra Kai, I want to do SETI, which is a reimagining of E.T. from the side, from the perspective of the scientists. Get in touch with me, creative cinematic perspectives at gmail.com. We've got the story all set up. Wyatt's going to direct. I'm going to shoot it. It's all done. Let's go.
All right, on that note.
Awesome.
Well, thank you all for coming and watching and or listening to another episode of Cinematic Perspective with myself, Wyatt Weed, Gail Gallagher, and Gil Poznansky, coming to us from Australia. And be sure to click and subscribe to us on all the different formats: YouTube, Instagram, and my God, what else?
Facebook, Twitter,
TikTok.
wherever you can find us.
Remember to give us a thumbs up on that holy plane where the spiritual being is, because you know what? We need all the help we can get.
All right.
All right, guys.
Bye-bye,
See you next
everybody.
time.
See you next time.